Hey, it's Ed. Before we start, I want to thank 4 brand new podcast supporters: Scott and Patty Mingle, Trenton Cussey, and Alan Doty. These 4 generous people signed up to support the podcast financially, which I greatly appreciate. If you want to learn more about all the options for that, you go to mountainandprairie.com/support. Thanks a lot. Hey, this is Ed Roberson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Mitsu Iwasaki. Mitsu is the CEO of the American Alpine Club, a historic and storied organization whose mission is to, quote, share and support our passion for climbing and respect for the places we climb. Founded in 1902, the AAC began as a social club for East Coast elites who shared a passion for climbing, adventure, and conservation. But over the past 119 years, the AAC has evolved into an open and equitable organization which provides, quote, knowledge and inspiration, conservation and advocacy, and logistical support for the climbing community. Mitsu took the helm of the AAC in the summer of 2020, ushering in a new phase for the club's growth and focus. Mitsu was born in Japan, but immigrated to Seattle with his family when he was 6 years old. In high school, at the urging of his father, Mitsu began spending his summers working on commercial fishing boats in Alaska, experiences that he credits as the genesis of his lifelong pursuit of adventure. He attended college in Washington State at the foot of the Cascade Mountains, then spent years as an outward bound instructor, successfully merging his love of climbing, skiing, and adventure with his career. A graduate degree in nonprofit management propelled Mitsu into leadership positions with several other outdoor education organizations, which eventually led him to his new position at the AAC. For anyone interested in melding personal passions with lofty career aspirations, Mitsu's life story will be both inspiring and instructional. We had a fascinating conversation covering everything from his early days as a climber living out of his van to his current focus of creating more equitable access in the climbing community. We started out talking about the AAC, its history, its goals, and its evolution over nearly 120 years. We then talked about Mitsu's personal background, moving to the U.S. as a child, adjusting to life in the U.S. while maintaining close connections to his Japanese heritage, lessons learned from working in commercial fishing, and experiences as an outdoor educator. We then talked about his vision for the AAC, and he explains the AAC's exciting new equity initiative known as Climb United. We also talk about his mentors, his favorite books, the best advice he's ever received, and Mitsu offers some useful parting words of wisdom. Be sure to check out the episode notes for a full list of topics and links to everything we discussed. Hope you enjoy. Could you start out just by giving a thumbnail sketch of the American Alpine Club and kind of the history of the organization and what you guys do?
Yeah, absolutely. So the American Alpine Club, we were founded in 1902. We're almost 120 years old now. We were founded as, I'd say the best way to talk about it is maybe we were a social club for maybe wealthy adventurers / climbers, to promote climbing. And the mission back then, I believe, was we provide knowledge and inspiration, conservation and advocacy, and logistical support for the climbing community. And obviously over 120 years or 118 years, we've evolved quite a bit. But in that evolution, we've done some things that at least I like to think have had, maybe to say profound is too much, but have had strong impact in the climbing space. So we helped to create the UIAA. It's the international body for climbing. I believe we helped to create the 10th Mountain Division back in 1948.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, right. And, we were a part of the 1939 attempt on K2, the 1963 First American Expedition on Everest. And in the 80s, I want to say the early 80s, the then president of the board, Glenn Porzak, looked at the American Alpine Club and said, well, we're the American Alpine Club and we're located on the East Coast, and this doesn't make a lot of sense. So spent a couple of years having this conversation with the board and moved us into Golden, Colorado. And I like to think that that's when the moment, when I think about the arc of the narrative of the American Alpine Club, they decided, that board and that staff decided that the American Alpine Club should no longer be an organization restricted to I'm just going to say, wealthy climbers that are part of a social club. It took a few years to get rid of this requirement that the American Alpine Club used to have, that you send in your climbing resume plus 2 members that refer you to the club. Mm-hmm. And then that goes into some black box and someone decides if you were worthy or not. They started work to dismantle that institution. And, 2 decades later, we are no longer requiring any of that. You just simply, essentially have to identify yourself as a climber and want to be a part of this club to join.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's great. I didn't realize the depth of that history, but it makes sense, when you think about 1902, like I'm a big fan of Theodore Roosevelt and I read a lot of books, and, in his day, the conservation movement was a lot of these wealthy white guys from the city. And so it makes sense that that's how it started, but I love how it's evolved. And I know I want to talk some about your Climb United, program, which is part of your, the modern day American Alpine Club that y'all are working on. But before that, could you just talk a little bit about kind of some of the things that American Alpine Club does right now? Because I feel like you've got so many interesting things. You've got your advocacy work, then you've got the American Alpine Journal, you've got the Accidents in Mountaineering publication. I mean, you've got all these different things that span a wide spectrum, but they're all super useful. Can you just, for people who aren't familiar, can you just kind of give an overview of some of the different things y'all are focused on?
Absolutely. And it is confusing because we do so much. At the very foundation, we are still about inspiring climbers and building community and supporting climbers. We have an education program that helps to educate climbers, and we're working in conjunction with a few other mountain clubs around the country to develop some, standards for volunteer-based climbing education, because there isn't really a standard today in the country. And through that education program, we engage volunteers to build community that kind of actually attaches into our community program. And then we also have a policy section that works to, help preserve and advocate for access to climbing areas. We also have a grants and awards program. So grants that help climbers live their dreams. We all have dreams about climbing big things or small things, or however we define our dreams in climbing. We have granting programs to help that. And we have awards programs that really celebrate accomplishments by climbers. We also own and operate, I believe it's North America's largest climbing library and archives here in Colorado. And it's one of these secrets that we don't see a lot of people coming in, because I don't think we've done a very good job of projecting that into the world. But if anyone's ever coming through Golden, it is an amazing library downstairs. We also operate lodges and campgrounds around the country. We've got campgrounds in New River Gorge, the Gunks, the Grand Tetons, Rumney, Waco. We also have a little shack up in Alaska we call Snowbird. As part of the membership, we also have rescue support. So if a climber gets hurt, they can call our rescue hotline and get evacuated out of the mountains. Yeah, so those are some of the things that we do. But again, for me, that all rolls back into our role is to inspire and support climbers and their dreams, and we want to be partners in people's dreams.
Yeah, I'll endorse that library big time. I've been there. So I used to live in Boulder, and now I'm in Colorado Springs, but we were always in Golden, and we would we went to the museum a few times, and I've been in that library, and it's really unbelievable. It's a great resource. And, I encourage anybody who's in that area to stop by and check it all out. I want to talk more about the club in a minute, but I also want to talk about you right now. And so, you're fairly new. You're maybe 6, 7, 8 months in. And, can you talk about, your new role there as running the show?
Yeah. So I am, what am I now? Almost 6 months into this role, and I am just feel so grateful, and sometimes it still feels surreal because I joined the club back in the early 90s and had never imagined myself being the CEO of the American Alpine Club. And I think for me, the opportunity to take a 100-year-old institution which is already in progress of changing to become more modern, and to have the opportunity to continue to push the change is yeah, again, it feels surreal and amazing. I would go back and say, as we change the organization or evolve the organization, my hope is to continue to work on the inspiring component, but I want to ask, how do we inspire a broader set of climbers out there? And how do we celebrate the accomplishments of a broader set of climbers? I kind of look back and say, when we started and many of the members of this organization, board members and staff started climbing, we all started mostly climbing outside, 20 or 30 years ago. And climbing has changed, right? Back then, we kind of looked at, or at least I looked at climbing gyms, which were just starting and kind of reluctantly went to climbing gyms as a place to train to become stronger outdoor climbers.
Sure.
And that identity for climbing, I think, has changed now. Most climbers start in climbing gyms and now transition outwardly, going outside. So that's just an example, but how do we start changing the identity or the impulses or the institutions that created this organization to become more modern, to kind of embrace the changing landscape? I think, 20 years ago, we all, or many of us, identified maybe just purely climber. But today, I don't think we do that. I think we identify ourselves as maybe climber, trail runner, ski tourer, paraglider. Like, the identities have become more mixed. And, how does the American Alpine Club evolve and embrace that we're kind of becoming multi-sport athletes at this point?
I mean, I know you're really just getting the momentum going, but I mean, what are some of your ideas about that? Because I mean, I think everybody who's in this world and in the climbing world, or even just in the outdoor recreation world, they agree with that. But I think it is quite a challenge, I think, to figure out how do you take it from this idea to execution. So, I mean, what are you? I'm not asking you to get ahead of yourself here, but like, what are you thinking about practical ways to make this kind of stuff happen?
Yeah. So as you or as we all kind of think about the activities that we do within the organization, whether that be the copy that we write or the imagery that we use, I think that it's often been constrained around alpinism. And I think that's still our core identity. But if you look at the new membership model, you'll actually see some skiers in there too, backcountry tours. And, you'll start seeing some trail runners in there too. And I think that imagery and the copy and the language is really important to say, that you belong here. Rather than saying we don't as an organization identify with the activity that you're in. So yeah, the first component for us is to change the imagery and the language to start embracing. It's also about us as staff and board to acknowledge that and it seems so simple, right? To acknowledge that we're not just climbers, to verbalize it and acknowledge within the organization to say, yeah, we're actually climbers and ski tours and trail runners, I think has actually a profound and lasting effect in the way that we look at the way that we project ourselves into the world. The work has to start internally, I think, before we can see it expressed outwardly.
And so I was looking on your website, your website's awesome, by the way. I feel like it's got such a great resource on a lot of different levels. And I came across, as we were talking about before we started recording, I'd been a member for years. And then I realized this morning that my membership had lapsed. So I immediately signed back up, and I encourage everybody listening to sign up if you're into the climbing world. But I saw there kind of 4 different buckets, I guess, of priorities right now: protecting public lands, ensuring access for human-powered recreation, safeguarding climbing environments, and climate change. Can you talk a little bit about maybe how the club is? We can just dig into one of those, the climate change aspect. What are you guys doing in that arena?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm gonna, if I can just take a moment and kind of roll back a little bit, and move myself into that conversation. So we are a membership organization of 25,000 members now, and I think that over the last 2 decades, Phil Powers, the former CEO, and the board have done an amazing job of growing the membership base. 2 decades ago, I think we were about 5,000 or 6,000 members, and now we're 25,000 members. To do that work, to grow the organization, I think the relationship with our membership was primarily transactional. the majority of the members became members because there was a rescue benefit, discounts on gear, and the publications. And those were the primary reasons why majority of our members became members. And we know that through surveys. Now that we're here with a large member base and, gravitas within the outdoor industry, we're starting to make a pivot from the transaction being the driver to our work in community, policy, and education being the driver. And the other benefits like rescue insurance or rescue benefits and publications and gear discounts being secondary to that.
Yep.
So we want the narrative to change from I'm a member because I can get rescued and I can get some discounts to I'm a member because I really support the good works that the American Alpine Club does in community, policy and advocacy and education. And that transition, I think, is going to be a bit difficult because we're talking about changing our identity. And we are still going to do the rescue benefits and such, but changing the narrative and the conversation is a bit difficult. To do this, we have to, again, look at ourselves and look at the organization and ask, well, what do we have to do first to build standing? And what are the processes and the institutions we've created within the American Alpine Club to change so that we have standing to have this conversation? So the first thing we're doing in terms of climate change is we are changing our banking relationship. And I should probably not name the banks we're changing from.
Yeah.
But the bank that we were using previously is not very climate friendly. Their investments, when you look at it, you just have to ask yourself, well, do we really want to, as an organization who believes in doing what we can to curtail climate change, want to be banking with a bank that invests in extractive industry? And so over the last 2 months, we've been working on, and we have a new banking relationship, and now we're working on changing all of our accounts over to a bank that cares about the environment and actually doing the hard work to invest in, renewable resources and de-invest, is that the right way to say it? Uninvest from extractive industries. So the first thing we do is the internal work. We are starting to look at, we have not done this yet, but starting to look at our campgrounds and lodges and ask, well, how do we turn these things to solar? And how do we reduce the impact otherwise? And how do we reduce the impact here in Golden in our headquarters office too? Doing the internal work so that we have standing again to have this conversation with the larger climbing community after we do this. Our policy, the board policy committee has started a strategic planning conversation about a month ago. And that strategic plan clearly indicates that climate change is important to us. And part of the way we know this, besides all of the obvious changes that we're seeing this, is we've invested some research dollars into climate research, mostly in alpine environments. And we know that some of the climbing areas, or we can go to the French Alps, and we invested in a research that looked at, I think, 36 or 37 climbing routes that have been guided over the last 20, 30 years. And we know that only 6 or 7 of these routes are now guided because of the conditions have deteriorated so much because of climate change.
Wow.
So we as climbers see change. And so we are incredibly interested in being a part of changing our own behaviors and having a conversation with our community to change their behaviors too.
No, I think leading by example is always the way to go. And, I think for somebody listening on the outside who hears about changing banking relationships and things like that, I mean, you mention it in a few minutes and it sounds relatively easy, but that stuff that takes effort and it takes some, it's not easy, and it's surprising where pushback can come from and those kind of things. Cause we've done some similar stuff where I work, sounds easy, but it's not. And so I think that's super cool. I want to hear more about you specifically. Like when did climbing enter your life, or really just life in the outdoors? When did that become a big part of your identity?
Yeah, where to start with that conversation? So I'm actually born in Japan in a little town called Kamakura, which is, if anyone of your listeners have a chance to go out there, and I'm obviously biased, it is a stunning little city about 50 minutes outside of Tokyo. It is the first seat of the shogun in Japan, And it was chosen because it's very protectable. It has mountain ranges on 3 sides and an ocean on the other side. So what it is it's become entrenched in long history since the 1600s, really, and also kind of this mountain town, coupled to a surf town, to a slightly artsy community. So that's kind of where my foundations are. And then my family, or my parents, moved in. I was brought along with them, I guess, because I was 6 years old.
6? Okay.
6, yeah.
Do you have much memory of Japan?
I do, because through the end of middle school and kind of early into high school, I spent multiple summers in Japan with my parents, thinking that we're in the States and I'm getting education in America, but I need to keep up with the Japanese student as well. So I will be going back to, all the kids, my 2 brothers and I, will be going back to Japan to go to school during the summers. And so we grew up in just actually outside of Seattle in Bellevue, so east side of Seattle, in a pretty wealthy suburb. Mm-hmm. And at some point, my parents decided the boys were getting soft, living in a wealthy suburb, and sent all of us in sequence, but to Alaska to work on a fishing boat.
Oh, wow. That's like, that'll toughen you up real quick.
Exactly. So here I am. I'm 16 years old. I'm handed a plane ticket to Anchorage. And from Anchorage, I'm going to grab another flight to Naknek, or King Salmon, out towards Bristol Bay.
Yeah.
And there I am to charter an airplane to get to Chignik, Alaska, which is, not at the end of the Alaska Peninsula, but it's pretty close to the end of the Alaska Peninsula where the Aleutians start.
Yeah.
And there I will be picked up by somebody. And so I wake up in the morning in Bellevue, and then by evening I'm in Chignik on a dirt runway, standing at the end of the runway, and there's actually no one there to pick me up. But I'm looking into the Pacific Ocean at this point, right?
Yeah.
And I've got these huge Alaskan mountains, and there's a sense of wild and wilderness and rawness that I had never experienced before. Yeah, so that sense of awe was just washing over me. And eventually I did get picked up and spent the next 2.5 months working on a small fishing boat, a 48-foot boat with 3 other guys, and learned about, really adventure, to be out there in the, it's not the middle of the ocean, it's you're coastal, but you're at the edge of the Alaska Peninsula in big water, doing things that are, I would say, really risky, right?
Oh yeah, that's a super dangerous profession.
It is so dangerous, and you're working 17 hours a day, 7 days a week for 21 days straight. I've seen boats sink. I've been on radio with Coast Guards, picking up people who have passed away. So I got to see those things between the age of 16 and 18. I did that for multiple years.
Who were the other, you said there were other people on the boat. There were 3 other people. Who were the other people? Were they local Alaskans, or what was that relationship like?
Yeah, so I should back up and say my father worked in the fish industry. And so that's how he had relationships in Alaska.
Got it.
And that's how I ended up there. So yeah, those other 3 folks, they're professional fishermen, right? One owns and operates the boat. And there's 2 other deckhands and me.
How do they treat you initially? Because I've been in situations like that, where I'm not the local, or I'm not the professional. And like, for example, one time I ended up at this duck hunting lodge, working at this duck hunting lodge in Louisiana. And I was the only one there that wasn't from Louisiana. And it took about a week before they would even talk to me. And I learned so much, and it's one of the most, influential experiences in my life, but it was awful. It was awful for the first week because they were so mean to me.
I would say that it was awful the first year. And it's so complex, right? So
yeah.
I'm like this, teenage kid, and in a grown-up profession, really. Like, there's not that many kids out there, or really any kids, unless your family is in the fishing business. I'm also a son of a Japanese executive in the fish industry, so there's some bias towards, there's some cultural things going on, but there's also this, he's the kid of the guy that helps to set the prices for fish.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so that doesn't encourage great treatment, but also good treatment too, right? So it's super complicated. And the relationship between Japan and America in terms of the fish industry is not necessarily positive, because at that time, Japanese corporations owned part of the Alaskan fleet, owned many of the canneries. So there's a tension in that relationship. And, being a minority in Alaska, which in some ways, like often people up there mistook me for being Alaska Native, which because I speak English with fluency. I would just not say anything, and maybe it was cowardly at the moment, but that actually, well, there's also some tension there, obviously, but that actually helped me kind of survive being up there. Yeah, but being a teenager and a greenhorn, I would say that I got hazed a lot. I got all the terrible jobs. Yeah, a lot of it was about survival.
So why'd you go back? So you did it the first year, and it was rough, and then but you had, like, at that point you had proven that, like, all right, you belong there. You can be a part of this team, but yeah. I would think, did your parents, quote, encourage you to go back the next year? Or did you want to go back the next year?
Yeah, I might say that it wasn't really a choice.
Okay.
Or at least not my choice to go back. And as much as I hated some aspects of it, again, my sense of adventure and resilience and kind of this core belief that I can do anything comes from those summers, and I am so grateful. And I also, honestly, I hated much of what I did up there.
Yes, I mean that is a real adventure, like in the real sense of a word, and because your life's on the line, and it was somewhat of a choice for you to be there, but those other guys, I mean, they were depending on, if they didn't go there, they wouldn't eat, and
right.
And your life's on the line. I mean, it's super dangerous. That's one of the main things I remember from reading Sebastian Junger's book, Perfect Storm, when it came out, is he went through the list of the most dangerous professions. And I think a tree trimmer was one of them, and then professional fisherman. And yeah, that's hardcore. I mean, once you do that, I would imagine it kind of blows out your, how you evaluate risk and adventure. Because when you're doing that, then you go on a week-long ski tour, even if it's scary, it's nothing like that.
Right. And I think, during that time, I really started to understand the difference between want and need. Like, I might want to be comfortable, but I don't actually need to be comfortable. I might feel cold, but I'm not hypothermic, right? Or, I may want to stop skiing after, 25 miles on a ski race, but I don't have to. And so, yeah, starting to recognize the difference between want and need, or I got that lesson early in my life.
Yeah, those are strong lessons to have. I mean, I think when we were talking on the phone a few weeks ago, I was talking about my experience with the National Outdoor Leadership School, and I had a similar version of that, just learning kind of to figure out what you can control and what you can't. And I don't know, I don't know how you get those lessons other than getting in the middle of it and really getting your ass whipped a little bit, and that leads me into experiential education, which I know that you're a huge proponent of, and you work for Outward Bound for a long time. Can you talk about your career at Outward Bound, maybe how you ended up there and what you did and what that experience was like? Because my wife has done 3 Outward Bound courses. I did a semester in Knowles, and we're both huge proponents of outdoor experiential education. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on all that.
Yeah. So I'll go back to Alaska again first, and what, as we just talked about, all of the learning and all of the kind of the core person that I had become being informed by Alaska. I just needed to have adventure at that point. Like, it wasn't, I don't know, it's weird to say this, but that need want conversation, it actually, I think for me, it's a need to have adventure. But going back to Alaska as a professional fisherman for the rest of my life wasn't really an option for me. Or an option that I wanted. There I had some choice. Yeah. And so replaced it with climbing, right? Because it's really similar. We're in really raw situations with a close partner or a climbing partner doing things that may or may not be dangerous depending on what we're climbing. But it was a great replacement. So I chose a college for my undergrad that gave me access to the North Cascades, and honestly, I probably spent more time climbing and skiing than I did in school. But really fortunate to have an advisor who understood and gave me some benefit of the doubt that I could do the learning, but also spend some time up in the mountains, because really for me, it had become a need at that point. after graduating, I chose to work for Outward Bound as an instructor because I do think we as human beings, I think we need to have, I'm not sure if it's right to say adventure, but we need to put ourselves into uncomfortable positions to grow. And I think that all of us are more capable than I think the self-imposed limits that we create for ourselves. And, things like our organizations like Outward Bound and Knowles and, opportunities to go climbing or skiing or, it doesn't even need to be outdoor based, right? You can be on a soccer team or you can be in a band, whatever these things are that creates opportunities for learning is really important and opportunities that impels us into experiences for growth. And with Outward Bound, and I think probably Knowles as well, being out in the wilderness for a week or 2 or 3 or 4, or, I used to teach 78-day courses. I think we develop a great deal of creativity. And I think we develop a great deal of resilience and, firm belief in ourselves. And I think we get to do this disconnected maybe from the noise that we have in our everyday lives now with all the screens and the pressures on our time. And I also worry about, even on this Zoom call, right, or regular phone calls, right, that we now kind of project our consciousness across distances. And you and I have actually never met in person.
Yep.
And being outdoors on like an Outward Bound course creates an opportunity for us to be present with ourselves again and not thinking about our consciousness. Sometimes English is a little difficult. Through emails or Zoom calls or phone calls all over the world, or Instagrams and the Facebooks and whatnot. We're no longer curating our identities, and we can be really present.
Yeah, I did my semester in Knowles in 1999. And so that was, I guess you could send emails at that point, but it was not this just ubiquitous screens in your face all the time. And it was still just huge for me to be able to unplug for 3 months and be very focused, all the distractions cut out. And that, at that time, and even now looking back, I realized that was one of the biggest benefits is just really shutting off all the distractions and focusing on the task at hand and the team. It was 9 of us. But I would imagine it's just so much more important now. And I guess when you were leading the Northwest Outward Bound, that was not too long ago. And so these phones and everything they were a problem. And so, could you see a difference in kids who would show up at the beginning, like say they're doing a 78-day trip, they show up and then when they leave, and what would be the ideal scenario that you'd like to see in a kid who comes in now present day, messing around on the phone all day, doing computer stuff. And then when they leave, what would be a good result in your mind?
Yeah, I would say, at least from my perspective, it's self-confidence, right? That's born from understanding themselves. And I think better understanding can, result in more confidence. And I think it can also result in more gratitude for the people that are around us and all of the things that we might have. The thing that I continue to see is a change in presence from someone that arrives on day one who appears to be really scattered, appears to have, their mind, again, their consciousness and thoughts all over the country or wherever it is on their social media, to coming out of the field, 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, being present with themselves and acknowledging who they are or who they are becoming and having the confidence to follow through on their convictions. Yeah, those are the things that I really want to see.
I'll tell you, I keep talking about myself, sorry, but my experience on Knowles was, I'd say, is hands down the most formative experience of my life. Obviously, except, my family and my parents' influence and that kind of thing. But as far as an event, something I did those 3 months, and it was there in your backyard there where you came of age in the North Cascades.
Right.
Man, I often wonder what would have happened if I hadn't have done that. Because you can't fake it. There's no other way. There's no other way to learn those skills than to get out there and be uncomfortable and be pushed. And the instructors, just Brady Robinson, who is a mutual friend, he was my instructor in 1999, and we're still in touch. So you were obviously at that point, in college and fresh out of college, you were committed to the outdoors. You needed this adventure in your life. But there's a big difference between being a skilled mountaineer or skilled outdoors person who loves adventure, and then having the skills to lead these organizations that you have led, because, leading the Northwestern Outward Bound, I mean, that's a huge organization. And then, your current role is a huge organization. And so how did you make that leap from having passion for the outdoors and knowing that you loved it to being able to lead these organizations?
Yeah. So, at some moment I decided that I needed to call my van transportation and not home. Yes. There's a moment of like, I've been living in a van for 8 years. Like, what am I doing with myself? And so I did go back to school, and then subsequently Outward Bound hired me to help with a merger with a small nonprofit that was based just outside of LA. And from there, I had an opportunity to work with Big City Mountaineers based here in Golden, Colorado. As their ops director. And, that first few years as an administrator was a lot of learning. And I think that I've been really fortunate to have great mentors who have been incredibly patient to help me learn and become who I am today. Like, I don't think that I did any of this on my own, right? I think there's just I've been lucky in both timing and opportunities that people have elevated me through my career. And so Big City Mountaineers happened for about 6 years. And, as Outward Bound was coming out from an affiliation into disaffiliating into the 13 schools that are here in the country, I had been with Big City Mountaineers for about 5 years, and the timing just worked out well in, Outward Bound looking for someone who had the skill sets that I did. And then transitioning out of Outward Bound, I had a short stint with the Masamas, and again, the timing worked out really well for me, where the American Alpine Club was looking for someone that can take a 100-year-old institution and ask, how do we evolve into serving a broader community? And I just happened to have the right skill sets at the right moment.
People I have on this podcast, they've all led such interesting lives and had very successful careers in whatever they're doing. And that's the common theme, is they all keep talking about how lucky they are. And I appreciate the humility, but when it continues, you continue to be lucky over and over and over. I'll be the one to tell you that's something besides luck. One more question about something you just said. You said mentors. Who have been some good mentors in your lives? And it could be people that you've worked directly with that have taught you things, or maybe people you never met, but you've read books about them, or you admire, historical figures or anything like that. I mean, can you name a few folks that have played roles either directly or indirectly in your development?
Yeah, I'll just go back to Brendan Leonard. We talked about him a little bit earlier. And he's never heard this from me, so he's going to listen to the podcast and go, oh, I'm his mentor or a role model. But, in Brendan, when I met him when we were both working at Big City Mountaineers, I think that I really admired him, or I'm sorry, I keep saying I think because that's how we construct sentences in Japanese.
Oh, yeah.
I've always admired him for his conviction to quit the job that he had at Big City Mountaineers and say, I'm going to be a writer, and I'm going to be the voice for the average climber or the average outdoors person, and not simply, at least from my perspective, placate to the marketing or the brand development that was happening at that time, where most brands, I think, invested in pro athletes. Brendan looked at the world and said, well, what about all of us who actually, are out there and are average human beings, and where's our voice? And I'm going to elevate that voice for the entire industry. And he does it with so much thought and care and generosity. And as we were talking about earlier, his ability to continue to give to people like me and you, I've done my best to kind of emulate that. And I think also, while I've known this through my work as an instructor at Outward Bound, what became really clear with watching Brendan and being his colleague and friend is that he helps the rest of us be successful. And through helping the rest of us be successful, he's obviously incredibly successful. He doesn't expect a return, though, right? He's just helping everyone around him be successful. And that has been, for me, a handrail into how I've lead and manage organizations now, is how do I create spaces around myself, and how do I interact with everyone around me in which I lift them and help them consistently find success. So, yeah, Brendan has been an incredible role model.
I think if you kind of dig below the surface, like he's a writer and a creative and a filmmaker, and I'll never be a filmmaker, and I'll never be a writer of his skill. But if you dig below the surface and kind of what is the operating system there, it's an operating system of generosity and of really trying to help people. And in my life, I went to business school to be a real estate developer. and now, I mean, that was my 100% goal. I'm going to be a real estate developer. And through a weird series of events, I decided I didn't want to do that. Now I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum as conservation in the conservation world. And I found like in my maybe mid 30s, I finally kind of changed my operating system from it's all about me and what can this do for me to what can I do to help, whether it's in business or, helping nonprofits or whatever. And that's when things turned. And I think Brendan has figured that out. He figured that out a long time ago, and that's how he approaches his work. And I think it's a really good example for everybody of just a kind of a general operating system, whatever you're doing, approaching things with generosity is, it works. It takes a long time. And Brendan will be the first one to tell you it's not like overnight success, but just over and over and over. And, now he's got people like me and you who are super fans. So,
right.
So back to the American Alpine Club real quick. I've got this weekly email I send out where I send out good news that are interesting things, positive things. And a few months back, I saw a job that you guys were hiring for the program Climb United. Can you talk about that now, or is it too early? Is that something you can talk about? And if not, I'll cut it out.
I can talk about that. Yeah, absolutely. So we did a soft launch a few weeks ago. Equity, access, inclusion is a really important conversation that we have to have in climbing. I mean, not just in climbing, across this entire country. As we pivot or evolve this organization, the American Alpine Club, into being more modern, part of our thinking is that we want to become a national climbing organization that is built around convening difficult conversations. So those difficult conversations might include, things that are related to mental health, because we have a lot of grief and trauma in climbing. We have substance abuse in climbing. We have eating disorders in climbing. We have a lot of misogyny in climbing. We have, challenges around equitable access to climbing. As I was coming onto this organization, American Alpine Club, and we were starting to think about this pivot, the conversation last summer exploded around route names. And it's something that the climbing community needed to address for a long time, right? There are a number of route names out there that are objectionably offensive to people.
Yep.
And I'm a believer that no one out there is doing anything with malintent, but they may not know that the impact of the routes that they choose or the names that they choose are objectionably offensive. But once you have to do something different, right? So my hope is that we start these conversations where we all become aware of our behaviors so that we actually start to change. So as that conversation was happening, a couple of large brands approached us and asked, well, does the American Alpine Club want to get involved in this route naming conversation? And I said, yes, but there's an asterisk next to this, is that the route naming, I think, is actually a symptom, or the objectionable route names are a symptom of a culture that underlines it. So I am interested in the route names because we need to change some of those and have some, handrails for our community to understand what is and what is not objectionable. But then let's create this other thing that we're going to call Climb United, or what we call Climb United today, that is about addressing the culture around climbing. And what we are doing today is bringing together communities from around climbing, both from brands, affinity groups, individuals, into, I want to say into a room, but there's no room that we can come into. Into a Zoom chat room, I guess, to ask, well, what do we want climbing culture to look like? And how might we help evolve our culture? And I'm kind of taking a cue from, Leave No Trace as an example. I think they did an amazing job of, putting out principles that we all kind of integrated into our thinking about what it means to be a good citizen or a good outdoors person. to leave little impact. So, through these Zoom rooms, what we're hoping to do is create some principles for being good citizens or being good climbers with an affinity towards creating a space that everyone feels welcome and everyone feels like they belong in. And once we get those principles created, our hope is to build a movement through the affinity groups, through the AAC, through the brands, so that over the next, I'm sure it'll take 5 years or a decade to make these principles something that we all think about. So looking at the long game here, in terms of trying to change culture, and culture that is informed through the communities and through the climbing industry, and not so much through the American Alpine Club, because if we go back to an earlier conversation, I don't think the American Alpine Club has standing to tell or say to the climbing community how we should behave or how we should be. I think that should be sourced through the communities to say, this is what we want the future to look like.
Well, I admire you guys for taking that on. I mean, inertia is a tough thing in any circumstance, but with these particular subjects and topics, I think it's even more of a force to be reckoned with. So I appreciate that you guys are taking it on, and I'll look forward to watching the progress. It's exciting. I mean, it's daunting, but it's exciting. It needs to happen. So,
yeah.
One last question about career stuff. I know when I got finished with my Knowles semester, my dream at that point would have been to work in the outdoor industry in one way or another. And so now that you've started as an instructor and now leading one of the most storied organizations around, what would be your advice for, say, somebody coming out of college who wants to build a career in either the outdoor or the outdoor advocacy conservation world? I mean, what would you tell them to do?
I think if I were to give advice, when I look at most of us, including myself, we come into the world with a lot of confidence often. And not enough humility. And I don't know that we actually learn to really listen, and to listen based on someone else's experience, that the person who's sharing something with you. We often just kind of base it on our own experience. So, if you're in conversation about whatever it is, try to understand the narrative that person brings with them, and not just like that moment of the balance sheet of that moment of what that person is saying. Like, truly try to understand and listen and understand where that person's history is, or an organization's history is. Mm-hmm. And know that, language really shapes our thinking. I think English is actually a really difficult language in terms of the way that I think, because it's so dominating. And it works in absolute statements rather than in the gray lines. Like Japanese works just in the gray, and you need some more solid statements. But what I continue to see is the inability to listen with humility, to listen without letting your ego get in the way, and understand what others are saying. And I think that then helps for us to become better acquainted with ourselves, to understand what our deficiencies might be, to make that transition from being an instructor to maybe, or a guide to becoming an administrator, because we have a lot of confidence again, and we have to be able to listen and let go of our ego to understand what our deficiencies are, and recognize that, maybe I need to go back to school, or maybe I need to go find a mentor, or maybe I need to take a job that for whatever reasons I feel like is beneath myself right now. But you got to do those things to build the skill sets and the competence to eventually run the American Alpine Club.
I think that's advice for anything. I mean, I think I love it. I think I can apply that to my personal life, my professional life. I think if everybody applied that across the spectrum, the world would be a much better place. So thanks for sharing that. I've got a few quick questions I like to run through at the end. Can I ask you a few of those real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
I read a ton of books. It's kind of weird how many books I read. And especially that, like in college, I would never read any books. And now all I do is read books. So are there any books that have played a big role in your personal development, your professional development? I mean, they could be about the American West, or they could be just books that you've enjoyed. I'm always looking for good recommendations.
I'm sure you've read this, and I'm just going to reach back 40 years in terms of a book that had a profound effect on me. Was it right? 40? Not quite that long. maybe 30 years back. So living in a van, right? Driving around California and the desert Southwest and being a climber. I can't remember who recommended that I actually read Cadillac Desert. I'd say that I was really naive about politics and water and, what it took to build California and build Vegas and the impact of our civilization or impact of our, what we might call progress. And so I went from being really naive to asking, well, what are my behaviors? What am I doing to continue to encourage, I'm putting progress in quotes, progress in the way that it is today. So profound effect on that, I think really, for me, changed my worldviews about impact and about, how we choose to live.
That's a good one. And that's super impactful. And people mention that a lot, and it's a grind to get through. And so, I mean, my job is, all day long, I'm dealing with water in the West, and it's amazing to me how many people don't fully realize the impacts of, I mean, the West is just one big plumbing system with water being piped all over the place. It's crazy. And like my town here, Colorado Springs, 80% of the water, like in this water bottle I'm looking at here on my desk, came from the Colorado River. They pumped it under the mountains. And, it's something that needs to be considered. There's another good one called Beyond the 100th Meridian, by Wallace Stegner, that's people could look up to if they see Cadillac Desert and run away because it's 600 pages or whatever. But
wow,
that's a really good one. I appreciate that. Any other ones that come to mind?
If we go back into kind of like the diversity equity conversation in American West, maybe Cowboys and West Indians might be a good quick read. Short stories about an Indian. Well, it's not really an Indian family. Let's call it immigrant family, living in Wyoming. And kind of the complexity of being in an immigrant family living in Wyoming. So if there's an interest in understanding what it might mean to not belong and to live in America or in the American West, but wanting to belong, that could be a good set of short stories there.
I've never heard of that one. Cowboys and West Indians, you said? Yeah,
Cowboys and West Indians, right? Okay. So it's a little bit of play on the Indians, because of Cowboys and Indians.
Sure.
West Indians from India. Or I think the family's actually from Singapore, but
I'll all these books will be linked to in the notes so people can click through. No, those are great, and I'll definitely check out that one, because I'm really making an effort to diversify the voices that I'm allowing into my head from reading, because it's I don't know, I read a lot, but I've realized recently that it's not as wide of a spectrum of voices as it should be. So that's perfect. That's very timely for me. This is kind of a hard one, but I bet you got to go. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
In terms of leading organizations, the opportunity to lead is really a responsibility, right? Don't do that from positional power. And I think we often, that's how it's often portrayed in media, right? Like you're the CEO or you're the ED or you're the president. So you have positional power and you get to lead through positional power. And that just does not work. It doesn't create an organization that is really cohesive. And it doesn't create an organization that individuals want to work with you and be with you and share a common goal. So, I kind of go back to what we talked about with Brendan again here too, is, don't lead with positional power, but, create the environments in which people around you are consistently finding success. At the end of the day, we want success. And, if you can create success consistently for people, they will align in the direction that you're trying to take an organization.
That's great. Again, just that's universal wisdom. So thank you. And so, kind of last big question: as everything having spent so much time in the West, in the wild places and in the cities, and just all the work that you've done, do you have any parting words of wisdom for the people who listen to this podcast? And it's people who just love the West in one way or another. It's always hard for humble people to offer words of wisdom, but I know you got some in you.
Yeah. That's a hard one. I don't know if this is any new wisdom, but, we all love the West and we all love the adventure and kind of the idea and the feelings that we get from the West. And, again, I don't think it's new wisdom, but we all have to get activated into protecting and preserving the West. We are headed down a really terrible direction with climate change today. And unless we are all going to choose to change our own behaviors, and not just the performative things and not just the window dressing, but really ask ourselves, am I going to change this? Like, am I really going to buy some of your readers might hate me for saying this, am I really going to buy a Sprinter van and drive it around the West?
Mm-hmm.
Really talk about and think about the carbon impact you're having by driving a big van, right?
Sure.
Maybe that's your second or third vehicle. Like, do you really need that? And I think, we have to look at ourselves and change what we're doing internally if we want to save the West or save our very existence, maybe even.
Well, that's great, man. I really enjoyed this, and I'm so happy to get to know you, and I appreciate all the work you've done in your first 6 months. I'm excited to see where it all takes you, but thank you for everything you're doing. It's really inspiring.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Ed. Really, really appreciate it. And I didn't honestly know about your podcast until a few weeks ago when we had our first conversation, and it has been running nonstop in my car since then. So thank you so much for all you do to spread the word of great people doing good work in the American West.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number three, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number four, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.